From the IBN Studios in the heart of Bourbon Country, this is a Bourbon Night Special Edition. Hello, it's Bourbon Night. I am Chad.
I am Sarah.
Welcome in. If you're interested in hearing more detailed things about our top 10 best bourbons and top 5 best ryes, then this is the episode for you.
And if you're not, then it's not. So there you go.
Maybe
skip this one.
In this episode, you can expect us to talk about things like what is on the bubble or just outside of our top 10.
The most available bottles that ended up on our list.
We will crown our top finished bourbon from the list.
We'll talk some trends.
We'll talk some upsets.
And surprises.
And much more. But first, our top story. Turn to camera 2. There we are. Yes. More discourse in the comments of our Best Bourbon of 2022 video, which we responded with a comment video and discussion. Feel like we really got some things out, had a really good discussion there. If you have not seen that video, you can click up here to view that. Also want to remind everyone that the top 5 best ryes of 2022 video is out right now. You can watch that. Well, probably also linked up there. And we did that sort of different, made 2 lists out of it, so technically it became the top 8. Sarah?
Next up, we have our On the Bubble bottles. Coming in at number 11, we had Elijah Craig Barrel Proof A122, which was 1.875 points outside of the top 10. At number 12, we had Rare Breed, our first staple showing up on the list, followed by Calumet Farm 16 Year. Next up, we had a few more staples with the 1792 Full Proof and the Four Roses Small Batch Select, followed in 16th place by the Maker's Mark BRT02.
And now for the On the Bubble for the ryes. Rye on that bubble from the top 8 spot, since we didn't do as many ryes. At number 9 is the Still Austin Rye. That was 0.75 away from a tie with Pikesville Rye. Speaks a lot to that. In the number 10 spot, we have Foregate Port Perry Perry. In 11th, the Blackened Rye, the Lightning. Coming in the 12th place spot is the Pursuit United, the Rye Oak Collection, which is finished with Sherry French Reserve Oak. Number 13 would be Saz 18 Year. Number 14 is our next staple, which is the Rare Breed Rye, and then another staple rye with the Knob Creek Rye, holding on to that 15th spot.
Our top ranking finished bourbon was the Foregate Kelvin Collaboration number 4, which had an average point score of 92.375, coming in 9th place overall. And it's worth noting that the Kelvin Collaboration number 3 was our second best of last year.
Okay, Sarah, going off some of the comments from the top 10 best bourbons of 2022, people were talking about availability, price, and so forth. And one of the great things is when you try 30 bourbons and you go back and you do analysis, you can kind of distill that down and look at what would have come in. And actually, everyone can do this depending on what's available to you. Like looking at the list, none of those are available. Okay, so that one would be the top available for me. What we kind of considered to be the most available, because we saw it sitting on the shelves in a lot of different places here in Kentucky, is actually Calumet Farm 16 Year. Now, this is a more expensive one, yes, so we're going to take care of that here in a second. But overall, it came in 13th, but we can say those 12 above it are a lot harder to find than the Calumet Farm 16. Now,
except for the Rare Breed, which did come in number 12 as a staple.
That's correct. I should have said not including any of the staples, just 2022 released. Now, if we want to take that cost into account...
Let's please do.
Okay, we're going to do that. Then that would make it the Maker's Mark BRT02. Sarah, this came in overall number 16, but with the price around $70, I would say that is what we would call our best, more available, lower priced,
non-staple
best bourbon
limited edition
2022 asterisk.
Print that. Send it to print.
All right,
that's the title.
Send it. That'll get some clicks.
Let's talk surprises and upsets. Number 1 being that Booker's 2022-03, the Kentucky Tea Batch, came in 22nd overall.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Chad?
Well, I was surprised about this one because we have seen Booker's really show up in the top 10 before in previous years. If this were, say, 2021, would have not been a surprise at all. Actually, we didn't even deem a Booker's good enough to go into the contention. But 2022, we felt like was sort of a resurgence or a rebirth of Booker's. That's hard to say. With the 2020-02 Lumberyard batch, and then also this 2022-03, which was our favorite by a hair, but our favorite, the Kentucky Tea batch. So to see it come in, I mean, yes, it's 22 of the best of the year, but still 22. I would have thought it would have been more on the bubble, if not maybe holding like top 10, like 10 spot if anything.
But again, I think it's worth noting that we are talking about these things in negative terms, like, oh, it came in 22nd. But again, that's out of the 25 best pours that we earmarked for this year that we had access to. So it's not like saying anything's bad, but I think that there could be another, underlying cause to why it came in so low, and I think we'll talk about that later.
We will. So another surprise, I think, here, and this is spoiler territory if you haven't watched our best Ryes of 2022, but gave you time. Okay. Thomas H. Handy came in first for our best rye, and
not a surprise.
If you take the scores, so this isn't before our adjustment where we did our double check, but if you just take the scores, it would have actually tied with the Heaven Hill 17 year if you had combined the rye and the bourbon list. And we love that Heaven Hill 17 year.
I love it. I don't know that I'm super surprised about that, just because when you look at our BTEC episode, I did prefer, I've strongly liked the Thomas H. Handy. I think a lot of people look at it as a consolation prize. If it's ever offered, an opportunity to buy a BTEC, people think, oh, that's the one I would take last. I don't think so this year, but I guess that is a bit of a surprise, because this is the first year that I've ever felt that way. Another surprise or upset is kind of an ouch for Old Forester this year.
Not a surprise, the birthday bourbon, which hasn't performed very well for us in the past years, came in at 29th, but the bigger surprise is the other Old Forester product that came in 30th, which was last. I don't know how this happened, but it was 1920, which was one of our staples, which we put in because it is so well reviewed by us and others, and it's a pretty good value.
Again, Chad, I think the number one thing to keep in mind here is when we're saying it came in last, we are talking about the best things that we pulled of the year. So last is not a bad thing. It's still good. We still like the product. Second thing to keep in mind, I think that this is more of a symptom of Old Forester has a very unique flavor profile. Nothing really tastes like Old Forester except Old Forester.
Right.
And what we've deemed the Four Roses effect in the past is when, Four Roses is also one of those that has a very unique flavor profile, and it can either, because it's unique, rise to the top or fall to the bottom just because it's the outlier. It's a bit different.
Right.
And I think that we might be seeing a little bit of that here with the Old Forester.
I'll agree with you there, Sarah. There was a little bit of a discrepancy in our scoring too, which made the average kind of come down a little bit, but that's a perfect segue to get into our next category, which is biggest discrepancies. There were maybe the biggest discrepancies of all with our scoring thusly, Sarah, in 2022, such as 19 points difference between the Knob Creek single barrel. For example, that would be 88.5 points for me and a 69.5 from Sarah, which made it an average of 79 points. But that wasn't the biggest. The biggest was actually 24 points apart, which is on the Bardstown Collection James B. Beam edition, 93.5. I really liked it. A 69.5 from Sarah, which made an average of 81.5. I'm actually sort of seeing a theme here. 11 points difference in our Knob Creek rye, 86.5, 77.5 with an average of 81, which put it in the 15th spot, by the way. So, Sarah, did you just not like Jim Beam? Also, Knob Creek 18, 11.5 points difference there.
And then we also see the Bookers coming in lower.
There's only a 1 point difference between our Booker's score, actually.
But it seems like there's a trend there with seeing things come in lower or having big points discrepancies when it comes to Beam products. I'll repeat it again. I don't think any of these are bad. However, that is definitely a theme, and it kind of harkens back to our original episode, 50 Under 25, where you picked a Jim Beam Choice Blind. Spoiler, again, if you haven't seen it, it's been almost 7 years. And I picked a Heaven Hill product, and I think what I can see from looking at this year's ranking is a lot of Heaven Hill products rising to the top and a lot of Jim Beam products either dropping down a little bit or having bigger discrepancies in between them. That's not to say I don't like Jim Beam products. I might just feel that one distillery perhaps did a bit of a superior job than another distillery this particular year.
Fair enough.
How do you feel, dear viewer?
Okay, if you'll excuse us for a moment, we need to pause for a station identification and tell you that this episode is brought to you by WhiskyAmbitions.com. It's our home on the internet where you can get things like the t-shirt that I'm wearing, the long sleeve that Sarah has, hats. Normally we're drinking whiskey out of all of our glassware. Also hoodies and bottle cut candles and more. It's always coming soon at whiskeyambitions.com.
And you can become a patron at patreon.com/itsbourbonite and join our community for as little as $1 a month. And that is where we release our barrel picks, the opportunity to participate in barrel picks, discounts on that merch depending on what tier you're at, and after the episode exclusives and more.
We'll be back after these commercial announcements. Now, it wasn't all discrepancies and differences between our scoring. There was actually a lot of times where we were aligned.
Sometimes we do agree.
Yes.
Our scores were actually exactly the same on the Four-Gate Indiana Foundation Bourbon, Rare Breed, the Old Fitzgerald Fall 19-year release, and the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection 17-year. We were only 0.25 points apart on the Parker's Heritage Double Barrel Blended Bourbon, which is a mouthful.
Hard to say.
And we were only half a point apart on the William LaRue Weller and the Four Roses Small Batch Limited Edition.
Yeah,
Very aligned on those.
The theme that I see is the ones that placed higher, we were a lot closer. I was gonna say the ones that placed lower, we would sometimes have more of a gap. We did get pretty close, a point or two on some of those lower scored ones. But the exception being the Bardstown Collection, James P. Beam. If you had scored anything close to mine, that would have been in the top 10. It would have. It was your
marriage
score.
Partnership.
Yeah.
It's about what's that word called?
I don't remember.
When you give up stuff so that the other person, what's it called?
Giving up.
Concessions? What is
Compromise.
it? Oh, that's the word.
You tricked me into saying that. Now on to talk more about our double check, because this year it really did sort of move some things around. The double check again, Sarah, not to tell you, I'm telling the audience here.
Tell me, Chad, how does it work?
Well, we score these blind independently, average our scores, as you know, but we want to make sure what scored in the top 10 really belongs there. So we took top 10 based on scores, and then a few outside of that top 10
on the bubble.
On the bubble, to see if things would move around. And we took the top 5, we tried them together, we sort of got those in order. Then we tried some of the low, so like the 4 or 5 against the next 5 group, if any of this makes sense.
This is a lot, Chad. I know how it works, and I'm barely following.
What we did is we wanted to try things back to back, where the whole idea before that was not to. And this is why I think a lot of the staples, or staple bourbons, fell out. It's because we were familiar with them, we scored them, but then you start drinking it next to some of these most exceptional things of the year.
Right, so let's talk about that, because as you said, I think the purpose why we do the double check is sort of the reason why we do flight fights. I can taste something independently on its own and feel one way about it, but then in comparison against something else, it might put things into perspective. Oh, this finish on this one isn't as great as this one. And so that's why we do that. And I think, we were very aligned on a lot of our staples, our scoring there, and they did fairly well. We had 3 come in the top half of all the bourbons, so in the top 15.
That's true.
Which I think is notable. But I think the reason why some of those scored higher initially and then fell down on the double check is because they taste very familiar to us. It's comfort bourbons, right?
It's comfort bourbons.
Rare Breed, the 1792 Full Proof, the Four Roses Small Batch Select. So when we're tasting them independently and scoring them, we're like, oh, this feels good, this feels right. Then you try them up against, in the flight fight effect, you try them up against some of these old ones that have maybe more age or whatever. They're maybe a bit higher proof. For us, they're just doing a little bit more.
They were selected for the reason of them being exceptional.
Right.
And they're going up against really good, but admittedly or arguably less exceptional things, because you can't put exceptional out every day, because you
won't
run out.
Right, exactly. And I think, again, it's worth remembering that we do the double check blind as well. So it's not like we're saying, oh, well, we should move that down because it is an everyday staple. We don't know what they are, so it really is just a matter of A/B testing and making sure everything is in the spot that it's supposed to be in, taste-wise.
The biggest slide of those staples would have to be Rare Breed, which was the biggest change. It went from 7th place. Scoring-wise, it would have been 7th. Slid down to 12th after doing the double check. Now that is a big change. That doesn't happen. That's actually the first time such a big ranking change has ever happened.
Again, I do think that that's because we love Rare Breed. We adore it. It is very warm and cozy and familiar to us. So obviously we put it high. But then when you measure
back to back,
right? It's like, oh, this is still really good.
Because I see the other ones, the other staples, 1792. fell from 11th to 14th. The small batch select went from 13th to 15th.
So not as far of movement.
All the staples moved down. Now some of the others, it's just sort of anecdotal, but the Bardstown Bourbon Company collection went from 5th to 6th. Not that big. The Four Roses actually went up a spot from 3rd to 4th to 3rd.
The fine tuning of the list happens.
It was just a fine tuning, right?
But that is interesting to see that.
It is, and I do want to kind of note that scoring-wise, our first scoring-wise was the Parker's Heritage, and after the double check, that one also stayed number
it
1.
Remained.
So
maybe more movement this year than we've had in past years.
Yes, completely.
It's why we do the double check.
Completely. Which brings us to some trends, Sarah.
Yeah. So to start that category off, one thing that we've noticed is that Little Book has dropped off.
Yeah, where did you go, Little Book? It was a top 4 finisher with Chapter 3, which was back in 2019. Mm-hmm. Chapter 4 came in the 9th spot in 2020.
But we didn't enter it
No.
in 2021 or
in 2022.
Last year. I almost said this year.
I know they've been getting more experimental and a little younger in years, and that's fine to take that route, but for us, it hasn't been yielding the results, I guess, that our palates were looking for.
Right. I still don't think, it just, not a bad product, just didn't make it into the top 25 best of.
But a little disappointing to see that trend.
A bit, but it's something that we'll keep an eye on.
It. Yeah, we do like it. And lastly, we didn't see any Bardstown Bourbon Company Discovery Series this year.
That's right. The Bardstown Bourbon Company Discovery Series did have Canadian blended into it this year, so that one would be more of a world whiskey. So it didn't fall into either our bourbons or our ryes category.
That's right. Yeah, which is sad to see because Discovery 6 was 10th last year, so it came in that 10th place spot.
I will say with the release of their Origin series, I think they might have a promising hold on the 2023 competition.
Absolutely.
And at that affordable price point.
That's true. Now, one last thing you might have noticed missing from the top 10 that has been there in previous years is a couple of Buffalo Trace products, that being Stag Jr. and E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. Those were not in this year simply because
we didn't have access.
We weren't able to find them. So if we can't find them, we can't drink them, we can't rate them, we can't put them in.
Right, much like you. I'm sure we're all in the same boat there.
Yeah,
so.
Couldn't find them. Hope that we can include them in the 2023 edition, but yeah. And that, folks,
is all the news fit to print.
All the news fit to print. She took my line.
I did. You waited too long.
If there was any other questions that you all had about anything that went down with the bourbons or the ryes ranking, just let us know and we'll try our best to answer them.
Yes.
But I think that is where we will leave it.
All right.
If you haven't subscribed to us already, you can do so by clicking right up here. There's suggestions of other videos down here. Hope to see you over there in one of those. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Chad.
Okay, until next time, drink more bourbon.
Or rye.